Good morning again. So I think I have a very wonderful, easy task is to simply understand what's going on in the American-Russian relationship and what does it mean to us in this part of the world. So I'm going to start with a sort of a challenging question to all of the panelists here. Is this going to work? Are we going to have a good relationship, or should the world worry about what's going on? I'll start with you, Elliott.
First, thanks very much for the invitation here and for the invitation to participate in this panel. If I were asked to give a one-word answer, I'd say no. Not really. That is, there is an overlap between the United States and Russia on some issues, but there's a lot of competition. Syria is the obvious place where we see the confrontation, but we may see some cooperation. I think the question is, what are Russia's goals here? If, for example, Russia's goals in Syria are basically to prove that they're a good ally and to maintain those bases, air and naval, one could see the negotiation of some sort of arrangement, which the United States won't like. The United States was happier post-Sadat when the Russians were basically pretty much out of the region. But they have interests in the region, and one could see that working out. I think the question really is that the Russian goal? Is it just to keep a foot in Syria, or 2 feet in Syria, or are there broader goals for other parts of the region?
I want to get to the consequences of either, but Andrey, what is Russia's role? What does Russia want in Syria? What do you want to stay? In what circumstances? And if you want to get out, under what circumstances?
I think if we speak about Syria, I'd like to say that Russia generally maybe has... Yes, but because echoing is very... not sound is not... it's not good. From my point of view, the first, in Syria, Russia is looking for international cooperation. The main goal is to solve urgent problems. It's the first Russian position. The second, Russia, of course, try to demonstrate some capabilities to solve this problem. And third, the participation in the Middle East events means that Russia try to create elements of new world order. The Syria is a sort of testing ground, because if we can solve this problem in Syria, it means that we can solve many problems. Russia is looking for cooperation, for partnership, because it could be model for future international behavior, or future model of partnership, or something else. It's the main goal. And Russia, we understand that it's reality. We live in total new world. And we should find a way how we can cooperate, how we can build future, how we can create some peace processes. And this is the main Russian goal.
I want to ask all the participants either to come closer to the mic when they speak so that we can hear them. And if you cannot do that, I'm going to ask for a mic, hand mic, if you prefer. But in order to have a good level to understand this important conversation, I want to ask Vance, so is this what's it all about? I mean, what makes a good relationship between Russia and China? Is it how to fix it Russia and the United States, how to fix it in Syria? I mean, is this the bottom line, or is this only an opening statement?
Well, first, Birgitta, likewise, thank you so much for having me. Look, every U.S. president since the end of the Cold War has come to office with the desire and with the conviction to forge a successful, close relationship with Russia. And the argument has been that we have interests in common in the Middle East, around the world, whether it's counterterrorism, counterproliferation, global economy. And in the case of every president who's come to office, they've come in with high expectations. And at some point during their term in office, it's unraveled. And the relationship has plunged. There's a school of thought that says, look, why does this keep happening? Well, it's because of the result of misunderstanding. It's that we're not communicating effectively. My own conviction is that I think that the reality is more challenging than that. I think it really does come down to the fact that we have interests and values between the United States and Russia that are in basic tension with each other. The essence of U.S. national security strategy across multiple administrations is we don't want to see spheres of influence in Eurasia. The essence of Russia's national security strategy is to try to create a sphere of influence for itself. The essence of U.S. values-based approach is we believe that people should be able to pursue governments of their own choosing. Russia stands for something else. So that doesn't mean that we're bound for conflict. It does mean that there is an intrinsic tension in the relationship and that we're going to be competing with each other, and that is playing out most dramatically in Syria and across the Middle East today. But it's not the result of misunderstanding. I think it's the result of just a fundamental tension in how we pursue our interests and our values.
But wait a second. If the Americans and the Russians can just really communicate very well to curb any military spill of the misunderstanding, which is what you're indicating, you're suggesting that the fact that they don't resolve these problems is possibly an understanding, a prior understanding that it's okay, we can take our time to decide if we fix this problem or if we generate another one in order to divide the cake of wherever it may be in the world. Is this something you are insinuating?
Yeah, no, what I think I'm saying is that I don't think it's a failure of communication. I think it really does reflect discordant interests and discordant values in how we approach the world. And that's okay. We still have to learn to coexist. Neither of us is going anywhere. But it recognizes the fact it's not just the fact that we're not talking enough. We really do have just fundamentally discordant interests and values, and that plays out most dramatically in Syria.
Andrey Fedorov, I will go to you right away before I go to Ambassador Ramsey, because I just want to put the context of the American-Russian relationship and where does it matter before I focus on Syria. So is the focus Syria or is the focus the Ukraine? I mean, what is it? What would it be reasonable to think of that would fix this relationship in order to have hopefully a good condominium for us, but not a bad one, as is the case?
Prof.
Thank you. I would like to mention only one thing. In comparison to the previous period of Russian-US relations, now these relations are turned from reasonable to emotional. We don't have any kind of stable, constant, and effective partnership. This is the problem. We broke down nearly everything, and what's going on now is just separate attempts to find something, etc. As one of my friends in the Kremlin administration said, we are, with the United States, we are on the same field, but we are playing football and they're playing baseball. This is the problem also.
You mean soccer, you don't mean American
soccer,
football.
Soccer,
you're not playing American
soccer,
football and Americans are not playing football.
They're playing baseball, but on the same field. The problem of Syria is not the priority for the United States. We should realize this. It's just only one of the problems. For the United States, it's much more important problems of North Korea, Iran, and Syria is going in the second row. For us, the problem is a traditional one. Entrance is 1 cent, the exit is $1. The problem for us now is how to leave Syria. Not how to develop Syria. This is not the question. The question is how to organize the legal, consistent, and effective exit. An exit which will not lead to the separation of the country, will keep the unity of Syria, and will save our face in the Middle East.
Elliott, I don't want you to take this point right away because I want to hear from Ambassador Ramsey on one level, but please keep the thought. What does an exit for Russia from Syria require? But please keep that thought because I want to ask Ramsey, are the Russians able to exit from Syria if you don't do your job assigned to you, which is obviously a tough one? It hasn't proven to be successful so far, unfortunately. But could this is it mandatory? I mean, could they just reach an understanding without a political accord amongst the Syrians?
Well, Ragda, thank you very much for inviting me here with this very interesting panel and discussing an issue, of course, that is really fundamental to resolving the Syrian issue. Having lived both in the United States and Russia and worked in both countries, I think I have some understanding of their respective positions and the complexity of that relationship. I'm not here to discuss that. I think there are enough Americans and Russians who will present that point of view. Let me just very quickly go to Syria, and I think in the previous panel and others yesterday have said that Syria is the most urgent problem and does require a constructive engagement on the part of the United States and Russia. And just to remind you, I mean, of course there are differences between Russia and America, you know, across the board, but there are also similarities and I think convergence of interests. And in Syria, there is a convergence of interest. And I will very quickly refer all of you to the Dahlan statement issued on the occasion of the meeting between Presidents Putin and Trump. And there were some very important principles there, and I think we should highlight them. One is deconfliction in Syria. I think it has worked, and it continues to work, and I think we continue to attach priority to it. Second, the preservation of the unity, territorial integrity, and sovereignty of Syria. I think both presidents have attached importance to that. And to achieve that, they have underlined the importance of the UN-led process. Then I think third element, which I think is overlooked by many, when they refer to an area when both Russia and the United States cooperate, which is the southwest zone bordering the Golan Heights and Jordan. And there they did say very clearly that they would they would work towards reducing and ultimately removing all foreign military presence from that region. And I think that is a very important thing and could not only have implications for this particular zone, but other places in Europe, other places in Syria. So yes, there are common interests, and I believe it is possible for both Washington and Moscow to work out an arrangement within the context of a UN-sponsored. And I know you're mirroring basically the frustration of many that the UN process has not produced results. That's true. And I think many Syrians will share your view, but we need to understand that the UN does not operate in a vacuum, and the emphasis now is trying to get the main players, particularly Washington and Moscow, but also important regional players, to understand that continuation of this conflict serves no one's interest.
Malik, Dahlan, some people maintain that really for the Gulf states, Syria is of course important. I'm not saying it's not important, but that there is as much care, if not more sometimes, about the reflection of the American-Russian relationships on issues closer to this part of the world, be it Yemen or be it the bilateral relations. How important is Syria or Libya, for that matter, in the thoughts of the Gulf states when it comes to understanding or fearing or any friction or serious friction? Is there such an equation there? And do you hear that there is probably a better understanding, better behavior, if you will, from Russia on issues, on such issues like Yemen, like Libya, than on Syria?
Well, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. It's an interesting point that you make, and I think part of it really emanates from the sort of Russian position, which comes, yes, as we know, Putin's personality, but also aspirations, I won't say for a Tsarist Russia, but also the Third Rome. And I think in that regard, there is an acceptance that Russia not only wants to play a mediator role, but rather sort of a political shrink, that it wants to talk to everyone and listens to everyone. So the idea of a condominium between the US and Russia, I think, is understood by Gulf states that is not realistic. And therefore, you can see that there is a new sort of emergence of independent diplomacy. For example, do not underestimate the fact that His Majesty, the custodian of the two holy mosques, would go for his visit to Russia first and walk down and meet with Putin before visiting Mr. Trump in the United States. To us, that has a very powerful symbolism. We understand that Mr. Putin wants to talk to everyone. We understand that the Houthis are flying out to Russia. We understand that Rosneft is making a lot of investments in Kurdistan. And I think that level of confidence, for example, with Saudi Arabia, going and engaging with Iraq and Russia in a way that was never before. And don't forget, in 1967, the Soviet Union took a strong position with the Arab states, where it cut relationships with Israel. And that caused, even though it lasted for a while, we were happy about it emotionally as Arabs, it cost Russia a very heavy price because it wasn't able to mediate or negotiate when the time for peace came. And I think they understood this lesson, and of course the incident of Netanyahu flying on Victory Day suggests that Russia is also willing to keep a foot in some way or another, as well as how it plays its tigers in the region.
Mm-hmm. Well, Elliott, back to you on that issue of exit, Russian exit. Could Russia exit from Syria without addressing its Iran problem?
I think this is exactly the right question. Russia has a partner in Syria. Russia has different interests from Iran, and I think, in a way, the most interesting question is precisely this one of the Russian-Iranian relationship. Russia doesn't need Assad. If the Russian goal is a unified Syria, there can be a successor government without Assad that can try to make peace with the various parts of the country, particularly the Sunni majority, and that will allow Russia to keep those bases. That doesn't do it for Iran. Iran has a much larger project of this, to borrow a phrase from King Abdullah of Jordan, the Shia Crescent. Iran wants to have a reach to the Mediterranean. Iran wants to be on the Israeli-Syrian border. I don't think those are Russian goals. So what gives me some hope of a possible solution here is the separation of Iranian and Russian objectives in Syria. And the Russians have maintained, as we just heard, a relationship with Israel. It's a pretty good one. So there's no particular reason to believe that the Russians want to advance the Iranian project in Syria. If they do, there's going to be a lot of fighting in Syria. If they are willing to separate themselves, then one can see a negotiation.
Will that fighting be only restricted to Syria if that fighting will be the result? I mean, is this going to be a confined conflict, or is it going to be a larger conflict?
I came here from Israel, and the general view there today is that Nasrallah and the Israelis do not want an expansion of that conflict into Lebanon. So it would be the Israelis and the Iranians in Syria.
Are you telling me there is an understanding between the Israelis and the Hezbollah? You just mentioned Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah. Are you telling me there's an understanding between them, de facto understanding that contain it outside the Lebanese borders?
No,
or
I would say,
is this an American-Russian conversation?
I would say it's not a de facto understanding. I would say that each is assessing the goals of the other, and each assesses that its own situation would not be advanced if there were another conflict like 2006 now.
I want to go back to you because you are the one who spoke of the exit strategy or need for Russia from Syria. So do you now have an Israel problem? From the point of view of the Americans, you've had an Iranian problem in Syria. Now you seem to have an Israel problem because the Israelis at least are behaving in a way that they're insinuating they will not accept the military bases of the Iranians in Syria. How is that going to make your exit possible? What are you doing about it? Netanyahu was just there speaking to Putin. Give us what is the equation there.
I would like to start with one thing. In the current situation, when we're trying to find certain solution in Syria, both Turkey and Iran are our partners on the run, just on the run. The problem of Israel and Netanyahu, who was a number of times in Moscow during the last years, is only one. They want to be sure that new Syria, renewed Syria, will not be a direct danger, which is a very big question, because my understanding of the situation is that our friends in Tehran, they have absolutely another opinion. They would like to control Syria. And this is the problem in our relations. We don't bring it to the public too much, but this was one of the problems on the last meeting between Putin, Rouhani and Erdogan. So the problem is the future. The problem is the future because for the whole region, the issue of security of Israel is one of the very important ones, because it's also touched very much Russian-American relations. Security of Israel is not a regional problem, it's a global problem. And from Netanyahu, what he wants during the last talks with Putin, he wants guarantees, certain political guarantees that the new regime in Syria will not be a direct danger. Thank you.
Did he get them?
Partly.
Say it again?
Partly, only partly.
Explain.
First of all, we have the problem of Iranian influence, which is growing. This is understanding. Lebanon, elections in Lebanon is one of the last examples. And the problem is that it's not just a political competition. It's a global type of competition. It's competition which is both regional, global, and is touching all the areas. And the question of future relations between Iran, Syria, and Israel is the question of survival, not of dialogue.
Andrey Bystritsky, can you first of all come closer, because I want to understand you. Please use the mic properly so that I can hear you. I see you wanted to come in on this. Is it to agree or to dispute?
Russian behavior in Syria is element of new world policy. Is element of new world policy. Russia is looking for a new model for the world. Russia strives to find solutions for key world problems. Syria is one of the key problems. First, second, third, it doesn't matter. And when we speak about Russian exit from Syria, we should understand that it's unpredictable because it depends on Syria solutions. It depends on cooperation with the United States and other big countries. I can repeat that we should understand that the Syria policy is only element of whole Russian policy. Russia has a sort of model, a sort of understanding of justice world. And Russia is like to solve this problem. At the same time, we should understand that Russia is not Soviet Union. Russia is totally new country. We can see creation of new political nation. And this political nation is looking for own boundaries, own identity in the world scene. It's a very interesting process. Of course, I can't say that there is a Russian spring, but at the same time, we can see this new conditions, and new situation for Russia. And like I say that if we'd like to understand Russian behavior in this region, we should take into account understanding of contemporary Russia. And finally, about Russia and US relationships. It mostly depends on United States.
Mm-hmm. But wait, isn't there right now an idea that some in Russia uphold, which is when it comes right to it, and if it comes right down to it, that really Russia would choose its relationship with the United States over its relationship with Iran, that Iran is, an ally, temporary ally, whereas the United States is a very important partner in the world. So, having said that, after President Trump opened up the issue of the Iranian nuclear deal, and basically, whatever other details, let me focus on one part of it, which is to say, come Russia and come Europeans and come China and stop this Iranian meddling in the Arab geography, if you will. This is one of the things that is on the table. Why aren't you willing to do that? From Yemen to Syria, why is it so important that you're not investing in stopping the Iranian ambition, the Iranian project, even though it may threaten your relations with the United States and with some Arab countries? I know that you're very comfortable with your relation with some Arab countries because these are bilaterals. Maybe they're not pressuring enough, but maybe they will now that Donald Trump put things out on the table. Can you take that?
Russia is stopping now, and Russia is looking for world puzzle. It's a very complicated process. It's very complicated. It's not easy. Of course, I don't know answering on your question generally, but probably nobody knows. But I know that Russia is trying to find a sort of balance between other countries. And Russia is looking for cooperation with the United States. Russian president has underlined it. From my point of view, creation of our cooperation between Russia and the United States will be extremely important step. And it can help us to build a relationship with Iran and China. We should look for world balance. And a new world great chess play, the chess disc.
Vance, give me a moment. I want to go back to Ambassador Ramzi, and then because I want to take the question a bit out of Syria if I can, but I'll go to Ambassador Ramzi first. How big is the impact of the announcement of President Trump, the announcement on the nuclear deal? Does that have an impact on what to do in Syria, about Syria, in the relationship, in the conversation between the Russians and the Americans, or the lack of that conversation? How is it going to alter the decisions of Russia in particular? Because the Russians thought that, okay, we could do a process outside, and that will have the Turks with us, that would have the Iranians with us. Right now, Iran is a different ballgame for Iran. So how does that play out in the Syrian context?
Clearly,
Please, Ambassador,
yes, I think
if
I
you
need to
don't
get
mind
closer.
coming through the microphone because we can't hear you otherwise.
Yeah, maybe.
No, yeah.
Yes. I think clearly, the decision by the U.S. administration on the JCPOA is a very important one, and interestingly enough, we have not yet seen the full extent of Iranian reaction, regionally and otherwise. We've seen one action, maybe there will be further, but so far it seems that They are taking their time, gathering their thoughts, seeing how to react. And I think there's a full array of actions they can take. Clearly, Syria is an arena for possible escalation. We hope to avoid that, because if there is escalation in Syria, it will have ramifications certainly for a settlement. Now, so far, we've seen one action, and we've seen the reaction, and things have stopped at that. And what we are trying to do, both the Secretary General, the Special Envoy, and many other countries we have visited in the past 2 weeks, understand that it is in no one's interest that there be escalation in Syria. I hope that will happen. We haven't seen any indication that there will be further escalation at this point of time. But having said that, Ragda, we had always looked at May as a very sensitive month. There are other things that do not relate directly to Syria, but could influence the situation in Syria. Tomorrow, next few days, I hope that at the end of the day, there will be no escalation elsewhere. Escalation elsewhere will no doubt have an impact on the way the government, and that is very critical. I think many people here have not even spoken about the Syrian government and its attitude. I think any escalation in the area will allow further, I would say, reluctance to engage in a political process. And there can be no serious political process without the Syrian government being involved directly and constructively.
But then it's a different ball game right now, isn't it, Ramzi? First of all, thank you for being here, because I know Astana is happening, and so we really appreciate that you came to be with us. This is, I will always...
I promised you months ago, and I'm here.
I will always remember that one, but I'm not going to get less tough on you. So let me take this a little further.
Yeah.
It's been at least an impression that, de Mastura and yourself have been very much interested or given more attention to what the Russians want in Syria, because they own the place, in effect, at one point, when, at least during the Obama administration. Now we have a Trump administration that is saying, hey, hold on, not so fast. What does that do to your efforts? How do you change right now what you're doing? Or do you think you just go as business as usual and it will get you somewhere? Or do you have to adjust?
Well, for the UN, there's no business as usual. We have to adjust and accommodate, especially the superpowers and permanent members of the Security Council. We have had contacts with the US administration in the past few weeks, certainly with Mr. Bolton and Secretary Pompei. I think there's a better understanding of where the US would like to go. But I think more work needs to be done. But I think what is critical at this point is to get the Americans and the Russians seriously engaged on building on the commonalities. They have themselves agreed. It's the same administration that agreed, like I said earlier, on Da Nang. And I think there is possibility to move forward. Now, I'd just like to go back again to a point I made earlier, and I think, like I said, it's being overlooked. Part of the understanding is that there is a fear, a concern that foreign forces inside Syria can disrupt regional stability. It is confined, I think, in Da Nang to southwest, but I think it can be expanded elsewhere. And I think we need to base ourselves to look at that. That's very important.
Vance, can come closer, please, because it's hard when you are on stage to hear. Vance, is it a good idea that the U.S. troops are pulled out from Syria? How serious was President Trump when he said that? Was it a slip of the tongue, or was it really it's something that he has on mind? Because sometimes he says things and we think, no, it's not possible, and it turns out what he's planning. Is this a plan? Is it a good idea? Is it time to reconsider? I understand we have about at least, General Petraeus would probably tell us, but 8 or 9 bases at least, something like that, that we know of. I can't imagine that pick up and go. Is this serious or what?
Well, look, I think that President Trump, as David Ignatius said, has a number of instincts on this. The first is that recognition that we are in a very serious competition with the Iranians across the Middle East. The second is, though, also desire not to get bogged down for years and years in places that consume blood and treasure. And I think in Syria, the challenge is to how to square those two instincts. My personal conviction is that I think that it is possible to square them. That the presence that we have in Syria can be sustained because it is sustainable. And that until there is a more fundamental resolution of the situation there, it would be fundamentally incompatible with our interest in pushing back against the Iranian project for the United States to unilaterally exit. Now, how we stay and what numbers we remain, all of those things have to be worked out. But I think that one thing that President Trump and his team certainly do understand is the concept of leverage. And our presence in Syria is absolutely critical to giving us a seat at the table for that larger conversation. Now, apart from that, one of the lessons that we've, I hope, have learned over the last several years, more than a decade, is that we've repeatedly achieved our military objectives in this region, whether that was the overthrow of Saddam Hussein, the stabilization of Iraq during the surge, now the effective destruction of the territorial caliphate of ISIS, only for those military gains to be squandered. So I think we should learn at this point that we should be very reluctant to put up the mission accomplished banner. The fact that ISIS has been rolled back does not mean that we can step away. And the other lesson is that, frankly, when we step back and we take the pressure off, set aside the Iranian question, you can put that completely to the side. In the event that we are not there, the risk that ISIS itself will regenerate and once again pose a threat to the U.S. homeland, to our allies, that by itself is sufficient grounds for us to stay engaged. So my hope would be that the weight of all of those arguments will persuade President Trump, despite his concerns about cost, despite his concerns about open-ended commitments, why we have to remain.
Malik, Dahlan, because I'm trying to at times take this conversation out of the Syria context only, but I'm not succeeding, so let me try one more time. How about Yemen? Are the Russians helping in Yemen? I mean, at one point, 2 years ago, when we were here at Beirut Institute Summit Edition 1, at that time it was clear, and we understood from our Russian colleagues that they decided that they'll be quiet, that the Russians will be quiet on the issue of Yemen in not confronting or not making it a big issue at the United Nations, so let it slide, and then we help each other, understand each other in two different places. What's it like now? Where are the Russians on Yemen now? And does it matter? Does it have to be via influencing Iran? Is it possible, you think, under the current circumstances, that there is not such good communication with the Americans regarding Iran?
So since you gave me the opening of taking it away a little bit from Syria, and as a committed follower of the school of grand strategy and geopolitics, I do think that a lot of what's going on right now is about how, one, Crimea. I think a lot of the dynamics have been shifted from Crimea into Syria, unfortunately, into our region, especially if you think about it. If North Korea is settled, it's going to be the most dangerous, most complicated region in the world. Secondly, I think the real sort of grand deal would probably going to be some sort of an acquiescence about how NATO functions in the long term. And I think that's more important for Russia as it deals with the US going forward. In terms of the Saudi perspective, or let's say talking about Yemen, I do think that we have, don't forget, and I don't know if I guess the next sessions are going to talk about that more, but oil and energy is sort of another dynamic that's very important. I mean, Saudi's in discussions about importing gas from Siberia, from Russia, rather from neighbors, private placements potentially, as opposed to an IPO of Saudi Aramco. It may not be a political dynamic that we're talking about, but there are other dynamics that actually dictate how we deal with Russia and how we view things. No one is under illusions that Russia, in a way, has entered sort of into some modest and some immodest sort of adventurism in the region. But the reality is that what has happened is that Russia has taken advantage of some gaps and some opportunities, especially in relation to security. And unless the West, and unless we confidently maintain sort of a natural, confident relationship with the West, and try to surpass and confront these security gaps, ISIS, whatever it is, and also we have to accommodate China's role. Let's not forget that. That is absolutely essential. We may find a problem. And I think our best tool so far is to continue to leverage these political, economic tools that we have in the region. But I wouldn't dare speak about Yemen and other points with having authorities here, such as colleagues in IR, Dr. Gargash, and others. So,
Andrey, I'll get to you, but I have two fingers up from Vance for a quick intervention, and I'm going to get to you in 2 seconds. Go ahead, Vance.
Look, I mean, I think we keep kind of circling around this
Again,
basic...
I need to hear you.
I think we keep circling around this basic question of the game that Russia is playing and the game the United States is playing. I will set aside the sports analogy as being athletically illiterate and suggest a different way of looking at it. Right? For the United States looks at the Middle East and sees a series of discrete challenges that it would like to try to solve. And it looks at Russia as a potential element, either as a problem or as part of the solution for each of these. I think that Russia looks at the Middle East and is playing by Kissinger rules. What are Kissinger rules? It sees the Middle East as a theater, an important theater in a larger geopolitical competition that it is now engaged in with the West. Right? That is how the Russian prism for the Middle East, whether acknowledged or unacknowledged. We look at how the United States in the late 1960s and early 1970s tried to maneuver the Soviet Union out of the region as part of a larger Cold War strategy. I think in many respects, we look at how Russia has behaved in the last several years. It is applying those elements towards the region today against the United States.
Andrey, what is the grand strategy, and is there a possibility of a grand bargain? What are the components of a grand bargain if you could have it tomorrow?
I think the question is only one. Whether we can find a kind of model of division of labor between Russia and the United States in this region. It's obvious that even we are improving our relationship with Saudi Arabia, with some other countries, the influence on their policy from the United States is much bigger and much stronger. This is the reality. So our task, and it was correctly mentioned here, is to find the gaps where Russia might be present on a long-term basis, not just come in and go out. This is the problem. So we need now to have our own long-term strategy in the region, which will be also based on certain respect of US interests in the region. It's not possible without this to move forward.
So, Elliott Abrams, let's call it as it is. You are one of the closest people, at least in the way you're thinking, to this administration. We hope that you will be in power, in office sometime soon, so that we could say here at Beirut Institute Summit, we say Elliott Abrams was with us before he took another important position, because I know you've held several important ones. Share with us, please, how shall we understand, what does this administration want? How fundamental is the shift that at least looks like is a shift? And the prospects of a grand bargain, or definitely, I don't know, the prospects of confrontation, particularly through Iran.
The president sees the world as a kind of Hobbesian competition among countries promoting their own interests. And he's determined to promote American interests, military interests, economic interests. That does not necessarily lead to confrontation, and we see this in Korea. And I think that he has made it clear from the very beginning that he thinks it is possible to work out some arrangements with Putin where American and Russian interests do not necessarily clash. However, American and Iranian interests necessarily clash because Iran is trying to overturn the entire order of the Middle East. Mm-hmm. Russia has chosen Iran as an ally and as a partner in Syria at least. That's going to lead to a confrontation. And so the question, I think, is partly, will Putin decide that Iran's project in the Middle East is not Russia's project and pull back? If he does, then it is possible, I think, to see the American administration and the government of Russia figure out some way to align interests in the Middle East. I think the critical question here, it seems to me, is the role of Iran and Russia's decision about whether it will align itself with it has good relationships with some of the Arab countries, with Israel, in a certain way with the United States. It needs to break with Iran for those other relationships to come to fruition.
All right, so Russia decides not to break. Russia decides, let's say, this is a most important regional ally, and we're going to stick to it, and we're bringing, from their point of view, the Europeans with us, because the Europeans have not delivered as President Trump wanted so far. So what happens? What's the confrontation like? Is it only economic tools? Is the policy to pressure the European companies bad enough so that they cry uncle? So that Angela Merkel and Macron cry uncle, or is there not the danger of military confrontation, especially with the Israeli adventures inside of Syria?
First, I would say I don't think you will actually see European companies aligning themselves against the United States. This is not primarily what Merkel wants, what May wants, Macron wants. 25, 50,000 individual companies have to decide what to do about those sanctions, and I think they will not risk being caught. I think there is a possibility that these proxy wars which are being fought, and this is what's happening. Yemen is a proxy war being fought by Iran against Saudi Arabia. Syria is a proxy war being fought by Iran against primarily Israel and to a certain extent other neighbors. Those wars can continue for quite a while. They can expand. I myself doubt that they will, but they can certainly intensify. And I think that's one of the huge problems we face.
I'm going to go with 1 minute down the line, but I just want to ask you, Elliott, since I'm going to go this way, is this going to be? You know what? I'm going to save you to last because that's an important one and it's at the end. Can you tell me what picture do you see right now emerging in that relationship? In 1 minute, please.
Russia is a lone country. Iran, of course, is tactical union, tactical ally. Nobody knows future. I can repeat that we should use a worldwide scale for understanding Middle East problems. And Russia, I can repeat it, Russia is needs, of course, partners, a need of constellation of partners. And maybe it will be very, very complicated construction. But why not? We should understand that we live in new normality. This is new normality. Not good, not bad. Like every time and everywhere. It's our problem. But I am absolutely sure that regional problem could be solved. It depends on will and understanding of main players. It's a rational process. We could find decision. I am absolutely sure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrey. Vance, 1 minute, please.
I'd say Russia's great strategic advantage is that it has positioned itself so that it's closer to each of the major parties in the Middle East than any of them are to each other. Diplomatically, that's a smart position to be in. Its other great advantage is that it offers a model today in its kind of authoritarianism which has appeal and resonance to many in the Middle East and beyond. I think that the great weakness that Russia has is that at the end of the day, economically, demographically, technologically, it is in a weaker position to the West, which does mean, in the final calculus, it needs a deep, good relationship with the United States and the West more than it needs a Middle Eastern sphere of influence and empire.
Thank you, Vance. Ramzi?
Very well. I think what we are facing today in Syria is a test of the viability of the nation state in the Middle East. And I think most people will say, with few exceptions, that it is important to maintain that arrangement. Now, here is, I would think, a difference between the Iranian position and the Russian position. Russia wants to preserve Syria as a nation state. Of course, what form it takes is subject to discussion. Iran is thinking more alike, and the way it operates is with non-state actors. And so, as I think David Ignatius was saying earlier, we are not going to go back to 2011, but we need to have a nation state in Syria with a strong central government, but also with a different arrangement with the various regions. And I think this is what we are facing today, and we need to work in that direction. There are those who may not want that, but I think this is a fundamental difference, I think, between Russia and Iran, and I think it can be resolved if we have an agreement between the United States and Russia, and I think that is possible.
Thank you, Ramzi. Malik?
I'm going to say something about soft power, again, to move a little bit. I think in the summer, we're going to have a very important event. I think hopefully the future will allow us to have Saudi Arabia beat Russia in the World Cup and win the whole World Cup and also give citizenship to Mo Salah so that he can be part of the Saudi team as we win the World Cup in Moscow.
Andrey?
Yeah,
Thank you, Malik.
One comment. First, don't expect that Syrian problem will be solved soon. I think that we will need some more years.
How many?
2-3 years from my personal point of view. Second, don't think that Russia can bring once and forever a SIPE for solving Syrian problem. It became obvious within last year that without all parts involved in Syrian conflict, no solution can be found. It's not Sochi, it's not Astana, it's not the solution. Solution will be found only when all the forces, including military opposition, will be involved in the peace process. And last moment, don't expect that there will be something positive in Russian-American relations before transitional elections to the Congress in November. I think only after it, there is a possibility for the real dialogue also on the Middle East.
Thank you, Andrey. The last word is from you. And let me ask you, Elliott, if regime change is really the objective of President Trump for Iran, how long? Is this going to be done economically only or through infiltration otherwise? And if the project of Iran, the regional project of Iran, going to be, or will it be confronted by the United States? If so, how?
I think those are exactly the right questions, and I have to say to you, I don't know the answer. Because
no, you have to answer.
The president is, I think, torn, as was said before, between a desire to reach the outcomes that benefit the United States and a desire not to be dragged further into Middle Eastern wars. He has commented several times that the longest war in the history of the United States is the Afghanistan involvement. I actually think that as the new team takes over now, and I certainly hope, let me say personally, that we move to a policy of peaceful regime change. Because I think as we look at Syria, as we look at Yemen, as we look at this entire region, in fact, many of the problems of the region are the result of the Islamic Republic of Iran's foreign and military policy. And until that changes, these problems cannot be solved.
I want to thank you all. It's wonderful to hear all of you. I wish I had another hour to offer or another day, but that will happen another summit, inshallah. So I think we're going to go for a break if these are my instructions to tell you. We will break now for how long? There's a break for 20 minutes. Let's go celebrate. Thank you very much. Please.